Close your eyes for a moment and imagine a world before maps, before mountains, before even the faintest outline of land. A world where there are no continents at all, no shorelines, no cliffs, no quiet places where land meets the sea, only a vast, uninterrupted expanse, stretching endlessly beneath a dim and ancient sky. Tonight, we gently drift back to that world, a time so distant that even memory has no place there, when Earth itself was still learning how to become a planet with a shape, with stillness, with land. Let your breathing slow as we begin. In this early chapter of Earth's story, there is no familiar ground beneath your feet. There are no valleys, no forests, no hills rising in the distance. Instead, there is a planet in transformation, wrapped in heat, wrapped in motion, wrapped in possibility. And yet, even here, even in this restless beginning, something quiet is already unfolding, the first hint of land. But it does not arrive all at once. It does not rise suddenly from the depths. Instead, it begins almost invisibly, in slow, patient shifts, deep beneath the surface of a young and restless world. If you imagine looking down from above, you would not see the Earth we know today. There are no continents drifting apart, no familiar shapes of land and sea. Instead, you would see a glowing, shifting sphere. Its surface, still unsettled, still forming, as though the planet itself is breathing. There is movement everywhere, soft, continuous motion, the kind that does not rush, but never truly stops. And within that motion, the earliest story of land begins. At first, there is no distinction between ocean and continent, because there are no continents yet. The surface is dominated by vast, deep waters, though even these oceans are not yet like the ones we know. They are warmer, heavier, infused with minerals and heat rising from below. Above them, the sky is thick and hazy, not yet clear, not yet calm. Everything feels unfinished. And yet, this unfinished world holds a quiet promise, because beneath the endless waters, something subtle is happening. The surface of the planet, what will one day become the crust, is slowly beginning to organize itself, not in sharp edges or solid forms, but in gentle beginnings, like thoughts forming before words. Tiny regions, almost unnoticeable at first, begin to cool just slightly more than the rest. They are fragile, temporary, easily reshaped by the heat still rising from deep within the earth. But they are different, and in that difference lies the first whisper of land. If you imagine resting here, floating above this ancient ocean, you might not see these changes right away. They are too slow, too quiet. They happen over spans of time so vast they feel almost like stillness. But if you stay, if you listen, if you allow yourself to drift deeper into this early world, you begin to sense it. A subtle thickening beneath the waters, a quiet gathering of material, slowly becoming more stable, more solid. Not land as we know it, not yet, but the earliest step towards something that will one day rise above the ocean's surface. The first continent is not born in a single moment. It is something that grows patiently, layer by layer, change by change. And here, in this ancient silence, we are witnessing the very beginning of that journey. So let yourself settle into this deep, quiet time. A world without continents, gently preparing for its first. A world where land has not yet appeared, but is already on its way. And as we continue, we will drift even further back into the heat and motion that shaped this beginning, to understand how a planet without land, slowly, softly, learned to create it. Now, let us drift a little deeper, further back in time, to an Earth even younger than the one we just glimpsed. Here the planet is not calm, it is not yet quiet, it is still in the midst of becoming. Imagine the surface not as ocean, not as land, but as a vast, glowing expanse of molten rock, a world of soft, flowing fire, stretching endlessly in every direction. There are no stable forms here, no edges, no stillness, only movement, slow, heavy and constant. The Earth at this stage is warm beyond anything we can easily imagine. Heat rises from its interior in great, silent currents, turning and folding the surface like thick liquid. It is a planet that has not yet settled into itself, and so there is no place for land to exist, no solid ground to stand upon, no crust strong enough to hold its shape. Everything is in motion. If you could gently hover above this early Earth, you would see a dim reddish glow across its surface, like embers stretching to the horizon. The light is soft, not sharp, diffused through a heavy early atmosphere filled with vapor and gases slowly escaping from below. There is no clear sky, no blue above, only a thick veil, shifting slowly, quietly. And beneath it, the molten surface continues its patient flow. There is something strangely peaceful about this movement. It is not chaotic in the way storms are chaotic. It is deeper than that, slower, more deliberate, like the turning of something vast and ancient. The planet is not rushing, it is simply evolving. Over time, this immense heat begins to soften its hold, ever so slightly, not enough to create land yet, but enough to allow subtle differences to emerge. Some regions begin to cool just a little faster than others. Tiny variations, almost imperceptible, but important, because these differences are the earliest seeds of structure, the first hints that the surface will not remain uniform forever. In certain places, the molten rock thickens, becoming just a bit more resistant to movement. These areas are still fluid, still shifting, but they are beginning to behave differently. They are beginning to remember how to hold their shape. And though they cannot yet form true land, they are quietly preparing the way. Far below, deep within the earth, heavier materials sink while lighter ones rise. This slow separation creates layers, not sharp boundaries, but gradual transitions. The planet is organizing itself from within, building a foundation, and above the surface responds in kind. The molten seas begin to show faint patterns, gentle swirls and currents that move with purpose rather than randomness. Still no continents, still no land, but no longer entirely without structure. If you rest here long enough, if you allow your thoughts to slow with the rhythm of this ancient world, you can begin to feel the shift. The Earth is no longer just a sphere of fire. It is becoming something more, something capable, eventually, of stillness, of solidity, of land. But for now, it remains a place of warmth and motion, a place where the idea of land is still far away, but slowly, quietly, approaching. And as this great heat continues to fade, as the surface begins to cool just a little more, we move closer to the moment when the first true crust, the first fragile skin of Earth, will begin to form. A delicate beginning, rising from a world that once knew only fire. And now, as we continue drifting through this deep and ancient time, something gentle begins to change. The heat is still there, vast and powerful, but it no longer holds the same dominance over the surface. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the outermost layer of the Earth begins to cool. Not all at once, not evenly, but in quiet, scattered places. The first fragile hints of solidity begin to appear. Imagine the molten surface, still glowing, still flowing, but here and there a thin skin begins to form. It is delicate, like the surface of cooling liquid, easily broken, easily reshaped by the warmth beneath it. This is the beginning of Earth's first crust. It is not land as we know it. It does not rise above oceans, nor does it form mountains or valleys. Instead, it floats, thin, unstable, and temporary, on the still moving mantle below. If you could gently touch this early crust, it would feel firm for a moment, but beneath it, there is always motion, always warmth, always the possibility that it might melt and return to fluid once again. And often it does. These early patches of crust appear and disappear, forming and dissolving in a slow, quiet rhythm. There is no permanence yet, but there is progress. With each cycle, the crust becomes just a little more resilient, a little more able to remain. As the planet continues to release heat into the vastness of space, the surface begins to stabilize, ever so slightly. The cooling is gradual, but steady, and over time, more of these thin crustal patches begin to form. They drift, they break, they merge, like fragile islands in a sea of fire, still submerged beneath an evolving atmosphere, still surrounded by immense heat, but no longer entirely without structure. If you watch closely, you begin to see patterns. Areas where the crust lingers longer than before. Places where the surface resists melting, holding its form just a little more firmly. These are the earliest foundations of what will one day become continents, but for now, they remain hidden beneath a world still in transition. Above this forming crust, the atmosphere is changing too. Gases released from the Earth's interior, water vapor, carbon dioxide, and others, gather and thicken, creating a dense, insulating layer around the planet. This atmosphere traps heat, but it also begins to set the stage for something remarkable. As temperatures slowly shift, the water vapor in the atmosphere begins to condense, not yet as steady rainfall, not yet as oceans, but as the earliest faint suggestion of moisture returning to the surface. And when it does, it meets a world that is just beginning to harden. Where molten rock once flowed without interruption, there are now moments, brief but meaningful, where liquid meets something solid, where the earth begins to feel texture. The interaction is quiet, almost gentle. No sudden transformations, no dramatic turning point, just a gradual layering of change. The crust grows thicker in some places, thinner in others. It cracks, reforms and shifts, guided by the slow currents beneath. And with each passing stretch of time, it becomes a little more stable, a little more persistent. The earth is learning how to hold itself together, learning how to create a surface that can last. And though it is still far from forming true land, far from the emergence of continents, the foundation is now in place. A fragile beginning, a delicate shell floating on a restless world. If you imagine yourself resting here, watching this transformation unfold over vast spans of time, you might begin to feel a sense of calm in the repetition, formation, melting, formation again, each cycle bringing the planet closer to stillness, closer to the moment when this thin crust will no longer disappear, but remain. And as that moment approaches, as the crust grows stronger and more continuous, the next quiet transformation begins. The gathering of water, the deepening of oceans, and the slow, patient emergence of a world where land, at last, will begin to rise. And so, as the fragile crust continues to form and reform, the Earth enters a new, quieter phase of its long unfolding story. The heat has not vanished. It still moves beneath the surface, slow and constant. But above, something begins to settle. The atmosphere thickens, and the sky, though still hazy and dim, grows heavier with moisture. And then, gently, over spans of time too vast to measure in moments, the rains begin, not as brief showers, not as passing storms, but as a steady, endless falling, a soft, continuous descent of water from sky to surface. Imagine it, a world where rain does not stop, where droplets fall through a dense, warm atmosphere, landing on a surface still warm, still shifting, but now capable, at times, of holding them. At first, the water does not stay. It meets hot rock and returns to vapor, rising again into the sky. But slowly, as cooling continues, more and more of it begins to remain. It gathers in low places, in shallow basins forming within the uneven crust, small pools at first, then larger ones, until, over immense stretches of time, these waters begin to connect. The first true oceans begin to take shape. They are not like the oceans we know. They are warmer, richer with minerals, their surfaces often veiled by mist rising from the heat below. But they are vast, endless, and they cover nearly everything. If you were to look out across this ancient earth, you would see water stretching in all directions, a continuous expanse, broken only occasionally by faint, dark shapes beneath the surface. These shapes are not yet land. They do not rise above the water. They are submerged, unstable, fragments of crust that drift and change. Sometimes they press upward, almost reaching the surface, only to sink again as the warmth below softens their form. Other times, they break apart entirely, dissolving back into the restless mantle. There is no permanence yet, only possibility. The oceans deepen, their weight pressing gently upon the crust below, and this pressure begins to influence how the crust behaves. Thicker regions resist the pull of the underlying heat more effectively. They hold their shape a little longer, remaining intact beneath the water's surface. These are the earliest hints of something more stable. But they are still hidden, still incomplete. The surface world, as seen from above, remains one of water and sky, a quiet, endless ocean, beneath a dim, cloud-filled atmosphere. And yet, within this stillness, change continues. Beneath the waves, the crust slowly shifts and thickens in places. Material gathers, cools, and becomes slightly less dense than the surrounding regions. These subtle differences matter because they begin to allow certain areas to rise ever so slightly toward the surface. Not enough to break through, not yet, but enough to suggest a future where they might. If you imagine drifting above these ancient waters, you would feel a deep calm. No shores, no edges, just the soft rhythm of water, stretching beyond sight, and beneath it, a quiet, patient effort. The earth is still shaping itself, still experimenting, still finding balance between heat and cooling, between motion and stillness. The first land has not yet emerged, but its foundation is growing stronger. Each cycle of cooling, each accumulation of material, each subtle rise beneath the ocean brings the planet closer, closer to the moment when something will finally remain above the surface, a place where water will meet something solid, a place where the first true land will appear. And as we continue, we move gently toward that moment, the first emergence, the first quiet rising, of Earth's earliest land. And now, as we drift forward through this vast and patient passage of time, something remarkable begins to take shape beneath the quiet oceans. It does not arrive suddenly. There is no single moment where the Earth changes all at once. Instead, it happens slowly, so slowly that it feels almost like stillness. But within that stillness, the first true land begins to appear. Deep beneath the ancient waters, certain regions of the crust have been thickening for countless ages. Layer upon layer has gathered there, cooled there, settled into a form that is just a little more stable than the rest. These regions are different. They are lighter. They resist sinking. And so, very gradually, they begin to rise. At first the change is subtle, a gentle lifting, almost unnoticeable, like a breath taken by the earth itself. The ocean above does not part dramatically. There are no waves crashing, no sudden exposure of rock. Instead, the water simply becomes shallower. The distance between the surface and the rising crust grows smaller and smaller. Over spans of time so long, they feel infinite. If you were floating above this place, you might not notice anything at first. The ocean would look the same, stretching endlessly calm and quiet. But beneath you, something is approaching, something patient, something inevitable. And then, at last, there is a moment, not a dramatic moment, not a loud or violent one, but a quiet crossing, a point where the rising crust finally reaches the surface, and for the first time, remains there, a small expanse of rock, touching the open air, the first land. It is not vast, it is not towering, it does not resemble the continents we know today. It is low, uneven, perhaps only just above the waterline, but it is real, and most importantly, it stays. The water no longer covers it completely. The waves move gently around it, touching its edges, shaping it slowly. This is the beginning of dry land on Earth. If you imagine standing here, on this first fragile surface, you would feel warmth beneath your feet. The rock is still young, still carrying the memory of the heat from which it formed. The sky above is dim, filled with thick clouds and drifting mist. The air is heavy, rich with gases that have not yet settled into the balance we know today. And all around you, the ocean stretches endlessly. This first land is alone, a quiet emergence, surrounded by water on every side. It does not yet connect to anything else. It does not form a continent in the modern sense, but it is the beginning of one. Over time, more of these elevated regions begin to appear. Not everywhere, not all at once, but in scattered places, where the crust has grown thick enough, stable enough, to rise above the ocean and remain there. These early land masses are small, isolated, and constantly changing. Some grow slightly, as more material gathers beneath them. Others shrink, worn down by the gentle movement of water and the slow reshaping of the crust below. But the pattern has begun. The Earth has crossed a quiet threshold. It now knows how to create land. And once that process begins, it continues, patiently, endlessly. If you rest here, on this first piece of earth that stands above the water, you can feel the stillness of it, the quiet significance. There is no sound of life, no movement beyond the slow rhythm of water and the distant shifting of the planet beneath. And yet, this small, simple rise of rock marks the beginning of something vast. The first continent is not yet formed, but its story has begun. And as we continue, these scattered pieces of land will grow, and drift, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, begin to find one another. And so, from that first quiet rise of land, the earth continues its slow and patient work. The oceans still stretch across most of the planet, vast, calm, and uninterrupted. But now, here and there, small pieces of land remain above the surface, isolated, gentle, and enduring. They do not yet resemble continents. They are more like fragments scattered across a watery world. But beneath them, something deeper is happening. These early land masses, formed from thicker, lighter crust, begin to change over time. They do not stay still. Very slowly they move, carried by the subtle currents of the earth beneath them. Not like drifting objects on water, but more like slow, deep shifts, guided by forces far below the surface. It is a motion so gradual that it feels almost like stillness. But over long spans of time, these fragments begin to approach one another, and as they do, they sometimes meet. When two of these early land pieces come together, the meeting is not sudden or violent. It is quiet, drawn out, a slow pressing, a gentle merging. Their edges touch, and over time, they join. The crust thickens where they meet, becoming more stable, more resistant to the heat below. And so, the land grows, not in leaps, but in careful, steady additions. One fragment, then another, slowly coming together to form something larger. These growing bodies of land are what we might call proto-continents. They are the earliest versions of continents, not yet fully formed, not yet stable in the way modern land is, but beginning to take shape. If you could look down upon the earth now, you would still see mostly ocean. The water remains dominant, stretching across the majority of the planet. But now, scattered across that surface, are clusters of land. Not just isolated pieces anymore, but small gatherings, regions where land has begun to connect. They rise gently above the water, their surfaces uneven, shaped by the slow processes of cooling and merging. There are no mountains yet as we would recognize them, no sharp peaks or deep valleys, only low, broad forms, shaped more by internal motion than by erosion or weather. The air above them is still heavy, still thick with ancient gases. Clouds drift slowly, and the light that reaches the surface is soft and muted. Everything feels quiet, undisturbed. These proto-continents are not permanent yet. They shift, they change, sometimes breaking apart, sometimes growing larger as new fragments join them. But with each merging, with each slow collision, they become more stable, more capable of lasting. The crust beneath them thickens further, insulating them from the heat below, allowing them to remain solid for longer and longer periods. And as they persist, they begin to influence their surroundings. The oceans flow differently around them. Currents shift, subtly guided by the presence of land. Water gathers in new ways, responding to the shape of these early forms. It is the beginning of a relationship between land and ocean, a balance that will continue to evolve. If you imagine resting above one of these proto-continents, you might feel a quiet sense of grounding. After so much fluid motion, so much constant change, here is something that lingers, something that remains, even if only for a while. And over time, these land masses continue to grow, fragment by fragment, layer by layer, guided by the deep, slow movements of the earth. They do not rush. They do not force their formation. They simply become. And as they grow, as more pieces join, as stability increases, the earth moves closer to forming something new, something larger, something that begins to resemble the first true continent. And now, as time continues its quiet passage, these early gatherings of land begin to change in a deeper way. They are no longer just scattered fragments. They are beginning to grow together. Beneath the surface, the slow currents of the earth continue their gentle motion. They carry pieces of crust across vast distances, guiding them almost imperceptibly toward one another. It is not a hurried movement. It is patient, measured, like the steady drift of something that has all the time it needs. And when these growing land masses meet, they begin to merge more fully, not just touching at their edges, but pressing together, folding slightly, thickening as they combine. The crust in these regions becomes stronger, more layered, more capable of resisting the heat that still rises from below. With each merging, the land becomes more stable, more continuous. What were once separate islands of rock beneath the sky now begin to form broader, connected surfaces. If you could look down upon the earth at this stage, you would still see vast oceans stretching calmly across most of the planet. But now, the land has presence. It is no longer just scattered points. There are regions, quiet, low, and wide, where land extends across greater distances, forming the earliest outlines of something more unified. These are still not continents as we know them. They are softer in form, less defined, constantly shifting at their edges, but they endure. They remain above the water, holding their place through long spans of time. And in that persistence, they begin to shape the planet itself. The merging of land changes the way the crust behaves beneath it. Thicker regions sink slightly into the softer layers below, but not enough to disappear. Instead, they balance, floating gently, supported by their own structure. This balance allows them to last, to remain above the oceans, even as the earth continues to move beneath them. And as these land masses grow, something else begins to happen. Their surfaces, though still warm and uneven, begin to settle. The constant reshaping slows, just enough to allow subtle features to form. Gentle rises, shallow dips, the earliest textures of land, emerging not through sudden force, but through quiet persistence. The oceans respond to this growing land. Water moves differently now, guided by the presence of these broader surfaces. Currents shift, flowing around the edges of the land, tracing its shape. And where water meets rock, there is a slow, continuous interaction. No crashing waves, no dramatic erosion, just a soft, endless touch, shaping the edges of the land over time. If you imagine standing here, on one of these early expanding land masses, you would feel a sense of stillness unlike anything before. The ground beneath you is no longer fleeting. It does not vanish beneath heat or dissolve back into fluid. It remains. The air is still thick, the sky is still muted, but the world feels more settled now, more formed, and yet the process is far from complete. These growing bodies of land continue to move, slowly drawing closer to others, continuing their quiet merging. Over immense stretches of time, smaller fragments are absorbed into larger ones, disappearing into the expanding whole. The earth is gathering its land, bringing it together, shaping it into something more cohesive. And with each merging, each subtle shift, the planet moves closer to a new stage, a stage where these connected land masses begin to resemble not just clusters, but something more recognizable. Its surface is low, worn smooth by the quiet interaction between rock and water. But it is stable, and that stability is what makes it different. If you could look down upon the earth now, you would still see vast oceans, calm and stretching beyond the horizon. But now there is a presence within that ocean, a region where land gathers, not as isolated pieces, but as a connected whole. This is one of the first continent-like structures, a proto-continent, grown from countless small beginnings. Beneath it, the crust has thickened significantly. Layer upon layer of material has built up over time, creating a foundation strong enough to resist the constant pull of the deeper, warmer layers below. This thickness allows the land to remain above the water, to endure. And as it endures, it begins to influence the planet in deeper ways. The oceans now move around it more distinctly. Currents trace its edges, flowing gently along its boundaries. Water pools in shallow regions along its surface, forming early basins. Though they are still subtle, still shifting, the presence of this larger landmass begins to create variation. For the first time, the Earth is no longer a world of near uniformity. There are differences now between land and sea, between regions of stability and regions of motion, between what remains and what continues to change. If you imagine standing upon this early continent, the experience would be quiet, almost dreamlike. The ground beneath you would feel solid, yet ancient, still carrying the warmth of its formation. There would be no life to stir the air, no sound beyond the soft movement of distant waters. The sky above would remain hazy, filled with drifting clouds that filter the light into a gentle, muted glow. Everything would feel calm, undisturbed. The surface itself would be simple, without the complex features of later worlds. No deep valleys, no towering mountains, just a broad, steady rise of land, shaped slowly over time. And yet, beneath this calm surface, the Earth continues its quiet motion. The proto-continent is not fixed in place. It drifts, slowly, carried by the deep currents below, and as it moves, it encounters other fragments, smaller landmasses that have formed in distant regions. Some of these will join it, merging into its growing structure. Others will pass by or break apart, continuing their own quiet journeys. But with each passing stretch of time, the land becomes more organized, more gathered, more defined. The Earth is no longer simply forming land. It is shaping it, arranging it, allowing it to grow into something more cohesive. This early continent is not the final form. It is only a beginning, a gentle step toward the complex, structured world that will one day exist. But it holds a quiet significance, because for the first time, the Earth carries something that feels lasting, a place where land is not fleeting, not temporary, but present, enduring, and growing. And as this early continent continues its slow drift, guided by the unseen movements beneath, the next stage begins, the shaping of land through motion itself, the gentle forces that will mold these early continents, guiding their form and preparing them for what comes next. And now, as this early continent drifts across the quiet surface of the Earth, the story deepens, because the land is not only forming, it is being shaped. Beneath the calm exterior, beneath the stillness you might feel standing upon this ancient ground, there is movement, slow, steady, and continuous. The crust, though stronger now, is not fixed. It rests upon deeper layers that are always in motion, flowing gently over time, guiding the land above in a quiet, endless journey. This movement is what we come to understand as tectonic motion. But here, in this early world, it is softer, less defined, more fluid in its expression. The protocontinent shifts gradually, carried by these deep currents. It does not travel quickly. It glides, almost imperceptibly, across the surface of the earth, and as it moves, it encounters change. Sometimes the crust beneath it rises slightly, lifting the land in gentle swells. Other times, it lowers, creating subtle dips and shallow basins. These changes are not sharp. They do not create sudden cliffs or dramatic landscapes. Instead, they shape the land slowly, like the soft bending of something that has time to adjust. Over long stretches of time, this movement begins to create variation across the surface. The once broad and even land begins to show quiet differences. Some regions become slightly higher, forming gentle uplifts. Others settle, allowing water to gather in shallow, temporary pools. It is the earliest suggestion of landscape, not carved by wind or rain in the way we know today, but shaped from within, by the slow motion of the earth itself. And as the protocontinent continues its drift, it meets other pieces of land, fragments that have formed elsewhere, carried along their own quiet paths. When they approach, the meeting is gradual, a long, slow convergence. Their edges press together, not with violence, but with a steady, patient force. And as they do, the crust thickens further. Layers build upon layers, strengthening the land. In some places, this meeting creates gentle rises, the earliest beginnings of what will one day become higher terrain. Not mountains, not yet, but the faintest upward shaping of the land. In other places, the crust bends slightly downward, accommodating the weight and motion of these merging pieces. It is a balance, a quiet negotiation between forces. If you imagine standing here, you would not feel these changes happening. They are too slow, too deep, unfolding over spans of time far beyond human perception. But they are constant, always present, and always shaping the land beneath you. The oceans, too, continue to respond. As the land shifts, the flow of water adjusts. Currents trace new paths, moving gently along the changing edges of the continent. Where the land dips slightly, water may linger longer. Where it rises, the ocean withdraws just a little. It is a subtle dance between land and sea, a quiet shaping of boundaries. And through all of this, the protocontinent grows more complex, no longer just a broad, simple form. It begins to carry variation, texture, the earliest sense of form. The earth is learning not just to create land, but to shape it, to give it structure, to allow it to change while still remaining. And as these tectonic movements continue, as the land drifts, merges, and reshapes itself, the protocontinent moves toward a new kind of stability, a stage where the land becomes more defined, more enduring, more recognizable as something that will last. Step closer to the continents we know today. And so, as the slow movements beneath the earth continue their quiet work, the early continent begins to settle into a new phase. It is still moving, still drifting gently across the surface. But now there is a growing sense of stability within it. The merging of many fragments, the steady thickening of the crust, has created something more enduring, something that can hold its form for longer spans of time. If you could look upon this ancient world now, you would notice a subtle but meaningful change. The land is no longer just forming, it is remaining. The proto-continent stretches wider, its surface more continuous, its presence more certain. Where once there were scattered pieces, there is now a broader unified body of land, still low, still softly shaped, but unmistakably there. The crust beneath it has grown thick and buoyant, allowing it to float more securely above the deeper, warmer layers below. This buoyancy is what allows the land to persist, to resist sinking, to remain above the oceans, even as the Earth continues its quiet internal motion. And as this stability grows, the surface of the land begins to change in gentle ways. The subtle rises and dips created by tectonic movement become more noticeable, though still soft and gradual. Some regions lift slightly higher, forming broad, quiet uplands. Others remain lower, where water may gather for longer periods before slowly moving on. These are not yet the landscapes we would recognize. There are no sharp features, no dramatic contrasts, only a gradual shaping, a smoothing and settling of the land. The oceans continue to flow around this expanding continent, their movements now more defined. Currents trace long, gentle paths along its edges, guided by the presence of this growing mass. The interaction between land and water becomes more consistent, more stable, and with that consistency, the Earth begins to feel more balanced, less like a world in constant transition, and more like one that is finding its form. If you imagine standing upon this land, you would feel a deeper sense of stillness than before. The ground beneath you would seem firm, reliable, no longer fleeting or uncertain. The air, though still heavy and ancient, would feel slightly calmer. The sky above, still veiled in soft clouds, would carry a quiet, diffuse light, and all around you, the land would stretch gently outward, meeting the distant ocean in smooth, quiet edges. This is a world beginning to settle, a world where the first continent is no longer just emerging, but expanding, holding its place, becoming part of the Earth's identity. Beneath the surface, the slow tectonic currents continue, but their effect is now less about forming new land, and more about shaping what already exists. The continent adjusts, shifts slightly, but it remains intact, and over time, this stability allows for something new, a sense of continuity. The land is no longer temporary. It is not something that appears and disappears. It is something that endures. Through long stretches of time, through quiet changes, through gentle movement. And as it endures, it prepares the Earth for the next stage of its journey, a stage where the land becomes not just stable, but structured, where boundaries begin to form, where different regions take on their own quiet identities. The early continent continues its slow expansion, its gradual refinement, becoming, ever so gently, the foundation of the world we know today. And now, as this early continent continues its quiet existence, something even more subtle begins to unfold. The Earth, which once felt almost uniform, water and stone blending into one continuous story, now begins to show a deeper sense of organization. The land is no longer just a single, broad presence. It begins to carry quiet differences within itself. Not sharp divisions, not borders or edges, but gentle variations that slowly take shape over time. Some regions of the continent become slightly thicker than others, more resistant to the slow movement beneath. These areas remain steady, holding their form with a quiet strength. Other regions are softer, more responsive to the deep currents below, shifting just a little more, rising and settling in a slow, endless rhythm. This creates a subtle patchwork across the land, a sense that not all parts are the same, even though they remain connected. If you imagine drifting above this ancient continent, you would not see clear lines or boundaries, but you might feel the difference. A quiet change in elevation here, a gentle lowering there, the faint beginnings of structure. The earth is beginning to organize its land, not through sudden change, but through gradual refinement. Beneath the surface, the tectonic movements continue, but they are now working within a more stable system. The continent does not break apart as easily as before. It holds together, adjusting slowly, redistributing its mass over time. In some places, the crust thickens further, becoming even more buoyant, allowing those regions to remain slightly higher. In others, the crust thins, settling gently into lower positions. These differences are small but meaningful. They are the earliest hints of a world where land is not just present, but varied. The oceans too respond to this growing complexity. As the shape of the continent becomes more defined, water begins to move in more predictable patterns. Currents flow along the edges, tracing the subtle contours of the land. Where the continent dips, water may linger, forming early, shallow seas along its margins. Where it rises, the ocean pulls away, revealing more of the quiet, ancient surface. It is a slow and gentle interaction, one that continues to shape both land and water together. If you were standing upon this continent now, you might begin to sense a kind of quiet geography emerging, not in the dramatic way we know today, but in soft, gradual shifts beneath your feet. The land might feel slightly elevated in one direction, gently sloping in another. The horizon might carry the faint suggestion of variation, subtle changes in height and form. The sky above remains calm, the air still thick and ancient, but the world itself feels more defined, more structured, more complete. And yet, it is still only the beginning, because as these internal differences grow, as the continent continues to refine itself, the Earth moves toward a new balance, a balance where multiple regions of land can exist, interact, and evolve together. The single early continent is no longer the only form land can take. It begins to hint at the possibility of division, of separation, of multiple land masses forming over time. But for now, it remains whole, a vast, quiet expanse, shaped by gentle forces, carrying within it the earliest blueprint of the continents to come. And as we continue, the Earth will take one more slow step toward the world we recognize, a world where structure deepens, where land and sea find their lasting rhythm, and where the first continent becomes part of something even greater. And so, as this ancient continent continues its long, unhurried existence, the Earth begins to feel different, not dramatically, not in any sudden or overwhelming way, but in a quiet, almost imperceptible shift. The planet moves toward a sense of order. What was once a world of near sameness, of endless ocean and newly risen land, now begins to carry a deeper rhythm, a gentle structure, forming slowly across the surface. The continent, once simple and broad, now holds subtle complexity within it. Its regions, some slightly higher, some gently lower, begin to settle into patterns that last longer than before. These patterns are not fixed. They still change, still respond to the slow movement beneath. But they do so more gracefully now, more predictably, as if the Earth has begun to understand its own balance. The crust beneath the continent has grown thick and stable, strong enough to endure the quiet pressures of time. It no longer reforms constantly. It no longer disappears and returns. It remains. And because it remains, the surface begins to carry memory. Shapes persist. Gentle rises stay in place. Shallow basins continue to gather water. The land is no longer just forming. It is holding onto its form. And in this holding, the world becomes more recognizable. The oceans, too, have found a kind of rhythm. They flow along the edges of the continent in slow, consistent patterns. Their movements are guided now, not just by the heat below, but by the shape of the land itself. Water meets rock, again and again, tracing the same paths, reinforcing the quiet boundaries between land and sea. These boundaries are still soft. They shift slowly, expanding and retreating over immense stretches of time. But they exist, and their presence brings a new kind of calm to the planet. If you imagine standing here now, on this ancient early continent, you might feel something that was not present before, a sense of place. The ground beneath you feels certain, no longer temporary or fragile. The horizon carries gentle variation, subtle changes in elevation that give the land quiet character. And the ocean, stretching outward, feels like a companion to the land, not just a covering, but something that shares space with it. The sky above remains soft and muted, the air still thick with the memory of Earth's early atmosphere. But everything feels settled, not finished, but steady. Beneath the surface, the slow tectonic currents continue their endless motion. But now they work within a system that holds together. The continent shifts, but it does not dissolve. It changes, but it does not disappear. And over time, this stability allows for something profound, the possibility of continuity. The Earth is no longer a world constantly beginning again. It is becoming a world that can build, layer upon layer, moment upon moment, across deep time. The first continent, once a fragile rise of rock above endless water, has now become part of a larger, more structured whole, a foundation, a beginning that endures. And as this structure continues to refine itself, as the balance between land and sea deepens, the Earth moves closer to the world we know, a world where continents will one day take on familiar shapes, where the quiet processes we have witnessed will continue, shaping and reshaping the surface over billions of years. But for now, we remain here, in this early peaceful stage, a world that has found its footing, a world where land has risen and stayed. And as we move gently into the final part of this journey, we begin to reflect on how something so vast, so solid, so enduring, began so quietly. And now, as we rest at the edge of this long and quiet journey, we begin to look back, not quickly, not with urgency, but with the same gentle stillness that has carried us here, through the earliest moments of Earth's becoming, a time when there was no land, no continents, only a restless molten world, slowly learning how to cool, how to settle, how to hold its shape. It is almost difficult to imagine now, the idea that the ground beneath us, the vast continents we know today, once did not exist at all, that everything began as motion, as heat, as endless change, and yet, through that change, something steady emerged, not all at once, not through force or sudden transformation, but through patience, through repetition, through quiet persistence over spans of time so vast they feel almost like eternity. The first crust, forming and dissolving. The first waters, gathering beneath a heavy sky. The first fragile rise of land, barely touching the surface, and then, finally, remaining. It is a story not of dramatic beginnings, but of gentle becoming, of a planet learning, slowly, how to create something that could last. If you imagine returning now to that very first piece of land, that small, quiet rise above the ancient ocean, you might see it differently, not just as rock, but as the beginning of everything that would follow. Every continent, every mountain, every place where land meets sky. All of it, tracing back to that moment, that soft emergence, that first quiet step from water to land. And even as the earth continued to change, as continents would later grow, break apart, and reshape themselves again and again, that original process never truly stopped. It continued, deep beneath the surface, guiding the slow evolution of the planet across billions of years. The land beneath us today, though vast and ancient, still carries the memory of those earliest formations. The same quiet forces, the same patient movements, still shaping, still refining, still creating. And yet, when we think of it this way, there is something deeply calming in that continuity, a sense that the earth is not a place of sudden change, but of slow, steady transformation, a place where even the most immense structures, continents themselves, are formed through quiet persistence, layer by layer, moment by moment, time stretching gently onward. As you rest here now, you might imagine the planet beneath you, not as something fixed, but as something alive with slow motion. The continents, drifting ever so slightly, the crust, adjusting, settling, holding its form. All of it part of a story that began long before any memory, and continues long beyond this moment. And in that awareness, there is a kind of peace, a quiet reassurance, because just as the earth took its time, just as it moved slowly from fire to water to land, you too can rest within that same rhythm. There is no need to rush, no need to hold on to anything tightly. Everything unfolds in its own time. So let your thoughts soften now, like the early crust settling over a cooling world. Let your breathing slow, like the quiet drift of continents across deep time, and allow yourself to rest in the calm, steady presence of a planet that learned so gently how to create land, a planet that began with nothing but motion, and over time found stillness